fall. Just over a week ago, Cronje's family and friends mourned the first anniversary of his death, while South Africa still comes to terms with a career curtailed by corruption. Later this month in the United States, baseball's Hall of Fame will induct a new roster of legends. But as is the case every year, Pete Rose's name will be missing. The man with more hits, games played and wins to his name than any other is an outsider. He was banned for life because of a gambling habit. This is the Pete Rose and Hansie Cronje story, the fame and shame game.
Pete Rose began his rise to stardom in 1963. By the time he'd played his last game 23 years later, he'd smashed so many all-time records that his place in baseball's Hall of Fame was guaranteed. But his crowning moment came on September the 12th, 1985. The Cincinnati Reds' hometown hero stepped up to the plate against San Diego. He needed a base hit to beat Ty Cobb's record of 4,191, which had stood since 1928.
Here at Riverfront Stadium.
Eric Shaw was pitching when baseball history was made.
Pitch from Shaw into left center. There it is. Rose has eclipsed Cobb. That's number 4,192.
It was a moment that still lives with everyone who witnessed it. The extended ovation eventually bringing tears from the man affectionately known as Charlie Hustle.
For Pete Rose, this certainly his crowning achievement.
Hansie Cronje's international career began 7 years after Rose's heroics at Riverfront Stadium. He was part of South Africa's return to world cricket after the apartheid years. His impact was so great, it seemed nothing would be out of his reach once his playing days were over.
He was such a colossal icon. It's impossible to try and put into terms just the sort of the following that this man had. I mean, I liken him here to someone like Sir Bobby Charlton, you know, just absolute sporting icon, but even that isn't adequate because there was the political side to Cronje as well. He was a massive figure. I mean, this man could, as a white man, have run for president in a few years' time and possibly won.
His leadership skills were soon recognised, replacing Kepler Wessels as captain, and a proud career leading his country was underway. He went on to post the highest one-day winning percentage in history and hit over 9,000 runs in test and one-day matches. Cronje also claimed a healthy swag of wickets in both forms of the game, but in the late 1990s, the deeply religious family man also fell victim to greed. He was first accused of fixing matches in April 2000, when Delhi police revealed a taped phone conversation between Cronje and an illegal bookmaker. Cronje's later admission he accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars rocked the cricketing world to its very foundations.
It certainly damaged us, and in fact 3 years ago I don't think many people realised that cricket was on its knees. And we've come back remarkably since then, and obviously this last World Cup has been great for us.
Under Gray's stewardship, cricket has rebuilt much of the trust that fans lost in the sport at the turn of the century. For Cronje, however, the shattering verdict handed down by the King Commission in August 2000 saw him banned for life, leaving him an outcast, more famous for holding over 100 bank accounts than his hundreds on the field. His appeal against the ban failed, and while rebuilding his life as a financial manager for an agricultural company, he died when a cargo plane crashed in bad weather, 500 kilometres east of Cape Town last June. 4 months after Cronje's tragic death, Pete Rose was finally honoured for breaking Ty Cobb's all-time hitting record. The all-star switch hitter, he could bat right or left-handed, received a huge ovation prior to Game 4 of the World Series. His appearance was all the more remarkable because for the past 14 years he'd been considered an outsider, unwelcome in the baseball fraternity, after allegedly violating Rule 21, which forbids players and team officials from betting on baseball games.
To be in the top 10 most memorable moments of Major League Baseball last year, it's a great honor for him, and he should receive that. He was hard playing. He was a student of the game. He loved baseball.
In 1986, his illustrious career, which included 3 World Series wins, ended. He then managed his beloved Cincinnati Reds. But over the next 3 years, his gambling habits began causing personal problems. Rising debts and connections with illegal bookmakers were uncovered by a Major League inquiry, launched after suspicions had grown about Rose's activities. Baseball has never tolerated gambling.
It's a pretty clear thing. We're addressed on it every year. On every clubhouse, every locker room you go to during the course of a season, when you walk in, there's a massive big sign on the door of the Major League Baseball's rules, and obviously one of them is you can't bet on baseball. So it's quite a clear thing. It's not a grey area. It's not something that some players don't know about. It's very clear.
In 1989, the John Dowd inquiry uncovered thousands of bets by tracing phone calls from Rose's home and club office to known bookmakers. In August, faced with an apparently irrefutable mountain of evidence, Rose agreed to a life ban. Baseball Commissioner Giamatti summed up the gravity of his decision, and if history is anything to go by, there's little hope for Rose's reinstatement. A number of Chicago White Sox players, including the legendary shoeless Joe Jackson, were banned for life in 1920 for allegedly taking bribes to lose the previous year's World Series against, by coincidence, the Cincinnati Reds.
Here we are, 83 years later. The gambling is still taboo within the sport, and rightfully so. There's a hard stance that baseball has taken on this issue.
Despite the strict line laid down over the years, there are still many people campaigning to get Pete Rose back into baseball and installed into the Hall of Fame. And while Cronje's place in the Hall of Shame is assured, a CD released in South Africa last year paying homage to his life soared up the charts. So the question remains, how do we best remember our fallen sporting idols?
Well, I think sports fans always remember their heroes kindly, and so I suppose that will happen in this case. But what Cronje did was so serious, and not just he alone, but he was very much an integral part of nearly bringing the sport undone. I think that won't ever be forgotten.
While Rose has never admitted to betting on baseball games specifically, he is a self-confessed gambler, so question marks over his return to the baseball fold remain. But Cronje's public exposure in the courtroom had a sense of finality about it.
He was led down the wrong path. He didn't try and stop it. He actually tried to influence extremely vulnerable members of his side, those who were coloured, a black man, of course, those who were particularly vulnerable and therefore open to pressure being exerted upon them. He did that. He was callous.
His untimely death ended speculation about the rights and wrongs of a possible reprieve. But with Rose entering into unofficial negotiations with current Baseball Commissioner Bud Selig at the end of last year, it remains to be seen if he'll be cleared to resume working in baseball after 14 years on the outer.
No, he's not damaged good. He is known as the Hit King. He's known as Mr. Baseball, Charlie Hustle. He'll have a job the day it's lifted, without a doubt, especially in Cincinnati where he made a name for himself.
Rose's supporters argue he was simply a gambler rather than a manager trying to fix games, and perhaps he served his time. But until hard evidence proves he didn't bet on matches while coaching the Reds, it's difficult to see him being allowed back. 2 months ago, the Cricket World Cup was held in South Africa, and Cronje's memory sparked wide debate.
Alan Donald, of course, dedicated his World Cup performances to Hansie Cronje, and I remember sitting beside Alan in Edgbaston in the commentary box when Hansie Cronje was giving his first testimony, and Donald was listening to it with his jaw on the floor, and I said to him afterwards, after he'd heard it, "How do you feel, Alan?" And he said, "I don't know if my test career was real or not." And yet, a few years on, he's dedicating his World Cup to Cronje. It's a very, very complicated issue, that of Cronje's standing in South Africa.
We may never know what drove Hansie Cronje and Pete Rose to risk so much, but their off-field infamy will forever overshadow their massive achievements as sportsmen.
Whether or not we are aware, we are being judged somewhere. Every action, every thought you think is etched on you indelibly. Do I take you as I find you? Despite your reputation, I'm an angel by comparison, getting drawn in. So much older.
A lesson in life. That story produced by John Baldock and edited by Andrew